Ambassador Kepapani, thank you very much for organizing this event. I am a civil society activist, so I'm going to speak from that perspective, from that activism perspective. I think we should be letting off white doves and ringing the church bells and floating balloons, because this charter, the passing of this charter, was a momentous occasion. It was revolutionary. And the 50 years, we should be dancing in the streets and celebrating womanhood and family and marriage. Having said that, there's one point that's important to note, is that in the history of every nation, there comes a moment which can be called a defining moment. A defining moment is the point at which a situation is clearly seen to change, and in this instance it changed the lives of many men and women, children, changed the way men and women viewed relationships within marriage, changed our perception about male-female relationships and the status of women in our society. The passing into the law of the Women's Charter was our nation, our societies, our women defining moment. Dr. Gopin Sweet described the bill during the debate in the Legislative Assembly as a major advance in the social legislation, not only in the country but in Southeast Asia. I don't think we've had a social legislation such as this since. It's hard to imagine how different the world was for women before the 1960s. Mrs. Anne Wee gives us a glimpse of that world and the atmosphere during that process. The other writers, especially Professor Leong, informs us about how the law applies and its impact on our lives and its shortcomings. However, I would like us to move away from the focus on the Women's Charter and on its books, and bring the spotlight on the women of those times. I did warn you, I am a civil society activist. The women who formed the Singapore Council of Women in 1952, under the leadership of Mrs. Shreen Foster and Mrs. Jordy, and the women such as Madam Chan Choy Siong within the PAP, and the women such as Mrs. Teo Pek Leng in the Legislative Assembly, the likes of whom we have not seen in independent Singapore. There were several very significant outcomes that need to be recorded. It took the SAW almost a decade of lobbying the politicians to take on board the status of women and the issue of polygamy. These women were functioning in an environment which was far more conservative, far more traditional, far more male-dominated than one we ever had to confront. The various groups of women, there were 30 of them then, functioned along racial and ethnic and clan lines. They were mostly welfare and social organizations. There was no such thing, no such an animal as the Singapore community then. These women, who came together to form the council, managed to mobilize women of the different communities. They suspended cultural, sectional, and religious differences to join together to fight for a cause. That, theirs, was a remarkable achievement. That mobilization of women was, and is, the most successful mobilization of women in our history. With that mobilization, those women set in motion the idea of a Singapore community, of a Singapore nation. That is what they started. We should not underestimate that. That's my first point. My next point I want to make is that The next point I want to make is that the women were empowered in the process. And not just the women who were leading the campaigns, but ordinary women in the street. This sense, a new sense of themselves as women, treated with dignity and respect, a sense of empowerment and celebration was palpable in those years. The Straits Times in 3rd June 1962, a year later, observing these changes, reported that more women were participating in community activities. For example, they quoted the annual International Bazaar in aid of the blind. I remember that used to be a big event those days. That year of the Women's Charter and the year after, the women made it the most colorful and biggest bazaar and raised 101,000 in 1960 and 120,000 in 1961. The first year they started in 1953, they raised 23,000. 1959 they raised 70,000. The year of the Women's Charter, they doubled it. The same ST stories reported that Singapore women were taking more than a lively interest in various conferences relating to women's interests. The Singapore Council of Women were also functioning in a very political environment, and political parties, especially the PAP, fighting to establish their dominance. That helped too. Then there were women within the PAP who were also campaigning for a women's rights charter. My third point, a confluence of forces came together to enable success. 3 forces. No, 4 forces came together: the democratic political situation, an active civil society, and an NGO, the Singapore Council, was formed. The PAP's women members and the socially progressive spirit of the time, and the outcome was a very revolutionary document. As Dr. Gross said, a major advance in social legislation. Will we ever again be fortunate enough to come to a time when all these forces come together? The Women's Charter has yet to deliver on all the promises that it made in 1961. So we look forward to a confluence of forces. Thank you very much. Thank you.